Did you know that the health of your marriage has a direct effect on your kids? Welcome to our Crossroads Parent Resource on Marriage. We're here with psychologist Dr. David Smith talking about what a healthy marriage looks like. All right, so Dr. Dave, this is a basic question. What are some components of a healthy marriage?
I'd say 4.
Okay.
I'd say good communication, allowing for differences, keeping expectations in line with reality, and great marriages focused on themselves, not their partner. And so the first one is communication. People always think good communication is like talking a lot, is being able to just be very verbal. I'm actually not very verbal at home at all. My wife's Italian and she's very verbose. But what I try to pride myself in being is a good listener. So good communication starts with being a good listener, because I want to know you, I want to understand you. You honor someone when you listen. You ever see couples talking, and you can tell the other person not listening, they're just ready to answer before the other person's done? Well, and you ever notice that why some people keep repeating themselves? Well, they do that because they don't feel listened to. So great communicators, great marriages communicate well, where they listen, they know, and then they could answer what you now that they understand. They could empathize with it. And that cuts out 90% of arguments just by listening well and understanding. The next one is expectations. And that is really keeping your expectations in line with the reality. My way of being raised was not my wife's way of being raised. And so we're different. And different is not bad. Different is different. Okay? And oftentimes in marriages, we want to make it bad. Well, I've been doing this for so long. You should the same way. You got to cook a turkey this way. It's like, no, who said you should? So keep the shoulds out. And so really understand what are the expectations that you have internally about your spouse. My wife suffers from ADD, and so when I come home at night ready for dinner, I would be shocked if she would have dinner even thought of started, because she just doesn't think in those terms. So I've had to lower my expectations and then come in and join with the fixing of dinner. So there's a sense in which my wife has never been on time for anything. I could either be frustrated by that, or I could realize that's my wife. That's how they live in that area of the world. They don't even wear watches, for crying out loud, okay? Except they just look nice. So there's a sense in which, the expectations drop from being on time to like, we'll get there and we'll get there. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to stop fighting over those things. It's not willing to do that. So those are expectations. The other one is allowing for differences. And that's huge, because we all are made in God's image. We're not made in each other's image. And God has made us uniquely for who we are, and wants us as spouses to encourage you to be different, not to be like me, or me like you. And when we accept that in a marriage, we really allow ourselves to blossom and understand and grow ourselves in so much a better way. Because now I'm just not this monolithic person. I'm now more joined with my wife, and I'm a greater person because I'm wider, deeper, and have a different view of the world than I do. And I've been blessed by that.
That's so good.
So that's important. Then the final one is just they focus on themselves. And that stands for self. If me to come home and expect this of you and you, it's just unrealistic to do that. I cannot make my wife be on time. But what I could do in my own head and my heart is realize that I love her more than being on time, and I'd rather love her more than being on time. And so I'm going to manage my own emotions, my own expectations, my own thoughts of what's going on. Because sin starts in the brain. And when I start thinking of my wife in a terrible way, I'm going to then start treating her that way. But if I start honoring in my head, in my thoughts, I'm going to honor in my behavior and my words. And that's what makes a great marriage.
So good. There's so much in that. What kind of effect does marriage have on kids? So if you are doing all those things, you have a healthy marriage, how does that affect your kids? Or vice versa, if you have an unhealthy marriage, how does that affect your kids?
Wow. I think it's very directly. Kids are resilient, and because I see a lot of kids. I'm blessed to see a lot of kids. I just enjoy seeing them. And you can really see how a kid handles conflict by how their parents handle conflict. You can see how well good communicators kids are by, in general, how good their parents are. You can see how well developed a kid's self-esteem is and confidence is and sense of resilience is by how well their parents handle it. So I think there's a direct correlation there. So I think if you're doing those things I just mentioned as far as expectations and being a good listener, and you're listening to your kids, they're in turn going to be good listeners themselves. But if you're listening to your kid while you're on your iPhone, then they're going to be listening to others while they're on their iPhone. So we model so much, especially in the younger years, pre-junior high, before the age of 13, we have great influence over our children. And so what we model is so important. So if you and I are disagreeing and we're yelling at each other at the table, then we're modeling for what our kids, how they disagree. That's why I love parents who disagree, but disagree in a godly way. Disagree where I honor you, and it's okay that you're different from me. And your kids see that, and they're like, this is so cool, to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so I was overseeing a family dynamic one time and encouraging them to talk a certain way, in a godly, loving way one time. And the kids came and they joined, and the kids would look at me like, what happened to my parents?
Wow.
This is great. I'm like, this is the way you're supposed to communicate. Really? Yes. And so good parents will pass that on to their kids, where bad parenting or bad communication and marriages will definitely leak down to their kids too. There's a direct correlation.
Would you say that unhealthy marriages also lead to anxiety in kids? Like if kids see their parents fighting all the time or stressed out with each other or name calling, does that lead to anxiety for kids? Does that lead to insecurity? What does that do to them?
Yeah, I think anxiety in kids, by the way, is the greatest presentation now in therapy is anxiety. Depression has kind of become second now. Anxiety is, and it is in part, I don't want to blame everything on marriages. Right. A lot of it is due to social networking and Instagram and things like that, where comparative is going on, and anxiety is built up because I'm not as good as them, and you have that. But it's also anxiety is built through parenting, because if you see conflict, and conflict isn't resolved appropriately, then it creates a sense of lack of safety in a kid. See, a part of anxiety is where if I can't predict, like these lights, if I think these lights every time I sit here, every third time they fall down on top of me, I'm going to be sitting here pretty anxious, okay, hoping that it's not going to do this time. So that's predictability. And anxiety is that. When you can't predict something, you become anxious. So if I can't predict that when conflict starts at the dinner table, that it's going to be resolved appropriately, I'm going to be anxious. I'm not going to digest my food correctly. I'll probably ruin my appetite. And I'm going to become anxious and angry probably. But when there's a more peaceful and there's resolve and we can talk about things and it's okay to have a different opinion on things, then it creates a sense of predictability for me. Now I know that no matter when I sit at the dinner table, whatever conflict we have or disagreement we have is okay, because we all still love each other. And so that very much is a direct correlation with anxiety for kids. So when they see predictability, when they see their dad says what they're going to say and they do it, and when their mom does it, and they see a good communication pattern going, there's a sense of calmness and peace for the child.
So good. So what if there's parents who are listening today and they realize they do not have a healthy marriage? So in one of those 4 areas, they don't have a healthy marriage. What is one step that they can take toward a healthy marriage today?
One step?
One step, or one? You can get a couple. Give us a couple. Okay.
Well, I think the first thing is what you just said, and that's what I have down here. The first thing is you have to admit before the Lord, before your spouse, that I'm not a good spouse. I've sinned even, and it's a time of confession. I have sinned. I have not been all that God's wanted me to be. I've not been the best to you, and I seek forgiveness because I am not being the best husband I could be. One of the things I encourage all couples to ask each other is, how can I be a better spouse? It's a great question. Because when I ask my wife that, she'll tell me, and I've asked my wife that over the years many times, and she'll tell me. I ask my kids the same thing, and they'll tell me the same thing, what they'd like from me to be a better dad. But there's a sense where the first one is looking at yourself again, owning and humble yourself before the Lord and saying, I want to be, if I'm going to be married, Talia, I want to be in the best marriage I could be in. I don't want to be in a not as good marriage. Okay? Right. I want to be in a great marriage. And so there's a sense in which I want to take responsibility for my part. And so the first is admitting it to the partner, to your Lord, that you've sinned and that you've treated them in a way that is not the best way, and you mostly have thought about them in not the best way, and you want to confess that. The second one is ask God to help you. I really believe it's the spiritual issue in a lot of marriages, because I want God to renew my mind, renew my heart. And by that renewal and me thinking lovely and wonderfully, Philippians 4, on my wife, that I think of her as beautiful, lovely, the best wife ever, all those things, I'll begin to treat her in those ways. So the third thing is that commit to being encouraging and kind. A professor of mine used to say, catch your wife doing something right instead of something wrong. And just encourage it. And so I think that's another thing you want to do. You want to really become encouraging instead of discouraging, and become good listeners. So you really want to commit, and notice everything I'm saying is about me. You never want to say, well, if you were a better spouse, I'd be this way. No, it starts with me. When I'm a better spouse, you in turn may or may not become one. That's up to you. But I would lay my head down every night before the Lord saying that I've been the best man that I could be to my wife. And that's what leads towards great marriages.